A black woman strides confidently through the crowded airport as the hum of chatter and the clattering of luggage wheels surround her. She walks with purpose, her heels clicking on the polished floor, each step firm and deliberate. Her dark sunglasses hide the intensity in her eyes, but anyone who looks closely can tell she's focused. She's not here to waste time, she's on a mission, and everything she does reflects her commitment to it. The terminal is busy as usual, travelers rushing between gates and queues. The air is filled with a mix of anticipation and impatience, but she remains unaffected, unfazed by the chaos around her. She glances at the large digital board overhead, scanning the list of departing flights. Her eyes lock onto the one she's looking for. Her flight to New York is about to board, and she has just enough time to get through security and make it to the gate. She checks the time on her phone. A glance at her watch tells her she has about 15 minutes to spare. Her heart rate stays steady. She's calm and collected. There's a slight breeze from the air conditioning overhead, but she doesn't let it distract her, not even the noise of children running around or the hasty announcements echoing through the terminal. She makes her way through the crowd effortlessly. The passengers don't notice her, or if they do, they likely don't give her a second thought. They're too absorbed in their own worlds to notice the woman who seems to glide past them with an air of unshakable confidence. But there's something about the way she carries herself that commands attention, even if they don't know why. She's the kind of person whose presence you feel, even if you can't see her clearly. She exudes quiet authority, not a word spoken, but every move deliberate. As she nears her gate, she slows just enough to take in the scene ahead. The waiting area is filled with a mix of people, some seated in chairs reading books, others standing and chatting in small groups. She spots the gate agent, who is busy checking boarding passes and handing out boarding instructions. The woman approaches the desk, her movements smooth and fluid. She steps right up and places her boarding pass down on the counter. Without a word, the agent looks up from the pass and then looks back at her seemingly without recognizing her. The woman's gaze doesn't falter, her eyes locked forward, unwavering. As the agent scans the boarding pass, she can feel the weight of the woman's stare now. That's what she thinks she feels, the woman's presence behind her. She feels something there, something unspoken, as though the woman could ask anything of her, and she would comply. The agent hands back the boarding pass with a brief nod. The woman takes it without a smile and steps to the side, ready to continue her walk onto the plane. But then something strange happens. The man who is standing near the gate, a pilot who's checking through his flight manifest, looks up from his clipboard. He notices her for the first time. There's a shift in his expression, and she sees it. She sees that shift, the faint flicker of judgment in his eyes, just for a moment, the tiniest crack in his otherwise calm demeanor. She doesn't stop, she doesn't hesitate, she just continues walking. But she feels it, she feels the change. And then as she reaches the point where the gate opens, the pilot steps in front of her, blocking her path. He holds out his hand to her boarding pass with a look that tells her something's wrong. There's no need for words, she's seen this before, but it still stings, the familiar weight of assumption, the kind of dismissal that comes from someone who doesn't think she belongs here, doesn't think she has the right to be in the place she's headed. He looks her up and down for a moment, as though making a judgment that has nothing to do with her ticket and everything to do with her appearance, her race, her gender. She knows what this is without him saying a word. She knows exactly what he's doing. And in that moment, something inside her tightens just a fraction, but she doesn't let it show. Her composure, it is unshaken as she meets his gaze head-on. The pilot's eyes narrow slightly as he looks down at the boarding pass in his hand. He takes his time, as if assessing the woman, as if her right to board could somehow be questioned. He hands the pass back to her without saying anything, but the message is clear. He gestures toward the seating area, as if to say she needs to wait for confirmation. His tone is dismissive as he speaks to her. There's an almost imperceptible tilt of his chin, as if he believes his authority overrules anything else. She's not what he expected. She's not the kind of person who fits the usual mold of who gets to board, when and where and how. The thought crosses his mind without him even realizing it. The woman doesn't blink. She doesn't react with anger or frustration, but the silence between them feels thick with unspoken tension. She holds his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then calmly places the boarding pass in her bag, her hands moving with practiced ease. There's a slight shift in the air around them. It's subtle, but palpable. Something happens when she doesn't immediately react with the indignation he probably expects. For a brief moment, the pilot seems to falter, but only for a second. His gaze flickers between the woman and the passengers standing behind her. The people waiting for their turn to board the line is starting to grow, and with each passing moment, the woman can feel the eyes on her. She knows they're watching her, and she knows they're wondering why this is happening, why she's being singled out, why she's being delayed when no one else is. But she stands tall. She doesn't allow herself to be intimidated by his gaze or anyone else's in the crowd. She doesn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her flustered or upset. She can feel the weight of their judgment, but she doesn't let it weigh her down. Instead, she turns and calmly walks toward the seating area, like nothing's wrong, like nothing at all is out of place. And in her mind, she wonders just how long it will take for the situation to resolve itself, how much longer it will take for the truth to come out. The pilot watches her. As she walks away, his fingers tap nervously against the clipboard. He can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. He tries to push the thought away, but it lingers. The woman's composure, her calmness, the way she held herself, there's something about her that he can't quite place. He's been doing this for years. He's seen all kinds of passengers and handled all kinds of situations, but something about this one sticks with him. He doesn't want to think about it, but he can't help it. His mind races as he considers what could have possibly gone wrong. But the voice in the back of his head tells him he's making it worse than it is. He's been a pilot for over a decade, and he's never had an issue with a passenger like this before, so he dismisses it as an anomaly. The supervisor walks past him toward the woman, and his mind races again. He considers calling out, but he doesn't. The supervisor stops to speak to the woman for a moment. Their conversation is brief, but from the way the woman holds herself, the way she doesn't even raise her voice, he knows something else is going on. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's something, but he's starting to get the feeling that he's missing something important. He stands still for a moment, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling, but the thought doesn't leave him. As the supervisor and the woman exchange a few words, the pilot watches from the corner of his eye. He can't hear what they're saying, but he can see the woman's calm demeanor, her steady hand, the way she stands firm and unshaken. After a few moments, the supervisor nods to the woman and walks away from her, heading back toward the gate. The woman stands silently for a moment longer, and the pilot's heart beats a little faster. He knows something's coming, something he can't control. The unknown is what makes him uneasy. The pilot begins to reach for his phone, his fingers brushing the screen as he prepares to check for any updates. But before he can make the call, he hears a ringing sound from across the room. It's the phone on the supervisor's desk. The pilot freezes as the supervisor picks up the phone and speaks into it. The conversation is quick and urgent. The pilot can see the change in the supervisor's expression as the words are spoken, and his heart sinks as the reality begins to settle in. Something he didn't expect, something that will change everything for him. The pilot stands frozen for a moment, the ringing phone still echoing in his ears. He watches the supervisor. As the words are exchanged, the supervisor's face changes, his posture shifts. He seems to go from confident to suddenly cautious, a subtle but noticeable shift. The pilot feels his stomach tighten. A knot forms in the pit of his stomach as he watches the supervisor nod sharply, a moment of realization dawning on him. He doesn't know what's being said, but he knows something is coming, something that will shatter the quiet assumption he's built around this woman in front of him, the woman who just moments ago he considered an inconvenience, something to be dealt with, a passenger who didn't belong here in this world of high-flying travelers. She didn't fit the mold. She didn't look like the usual type of person he dealt with. The supervisor finishes the call and walks toward the pilot. There's a slight hesitation in his step. The pilot notices it immediately, the unease in the supervisor's gait. It's as if he knows something the pilot doesn't, and the thought gnaws at him with increasing urgency. The supervisor stops in front of him and clears his throat. Without a word, the pilot knows something is wrong. Something is about to turn his whole perception upside down. The supervisor gives him a look, one that says everything without speaking, and the pilot's heart skips a beat. In that instant, the supervisor speaks, his voice low and steady, but with a certain weight to it. "She's the owner of the airline. The words hang in the air like a shockwave. The pilot blinks, trying to process the statement, his mind racing as he tries to connect the dots. He looks over at the woman now standing a few feet away, still calm, still composed. "Are you sure?" The pilot asks, his voice betraying his disbelief. He's heard wrong. It doesn't make sense. It can't be true. But the supervisor nods, confirming what the pilot can hardly accept. The woman isn't just some random passenger. She's not just a businesswoman or a wealthy traveler. She's the one in charge, the very one who owns this entire airline, the name that's known across the aviation world, the name that's associated with success and power and influence. He feels a wave of embarrassment wash over him as the truth settles in his face. Flushes red with shame. His initial dismissal of her now feels like an irreparable mistake, one he can't undo. As the realization hits him like a ton of bricks, the pilot's mind starts to race. He looks back at the woman now standing with her back straight, eyes calm, but there's a sharpness to her presence that he hadn't noticed before. It was always there. He just failed to see it through his own assumptions, his own narrow lens. His thoughts whirl, and suddenly he's hyper-aware of how wrong he was, how utterly foolish he must have seemed in her eyes when he stopped her from boarding. He feels the sting of humiliation for the first time in years, something he's never really experienced before, not in this way. Not like this. His hand shakes slightly as he runs it through his hair, as if trying to shake off the embarrassment. The woman stands still by the gate. She hasn't moved. She hasn't said a word. She's watched everything unfold with quiet dignity. It's almost as if she anticipated this moment, the way she stood tall and unflinching, the way she never gave in to the pilot's judgmental look. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew exactly who she was dealing with. And yet she didn't let it affect her. She didn't let it break her calm. Her composure remained intact, as though she was used to this sort of treatment, as if she had dealt with it 1,000 times before, and now she had won without lifting a finger, without saying a word. The pilot feels a rush of guilt and shame flood his chest as he looks at her again, her gaze still fixed ahead, unbothered by the spectacle unfolding around her. He wants to apologize, but the words don't come out. He's paralyzed by the weight of his own error. He doesn't know what to say. He doesn't know how to make it right. But before he can gather his thoughts, the woman turns her head slightly and glances in his direction. She doesn't smile. She doesn't offer any words of comfort. But in her eyes he sees something that strikes him deep within, something that says she already knows what he's thinking, and it's too late to change anything now, too late to undo the damage done. The pilot stands there frozen, caught in the grip of his own realization. The weight of the moment presses down on him as he watches her, still standing so poised, so effortlessly in control. He can feel the sting of his mistake, now sharper than ever. But there's nothing he can do to undo it, nothing to reverse the moment he stepped in her way and doubted her. The thought gnaws at him as he turns his head slightly away, trying to regain his composure. But it's impossible. He feels exposed in a way he hasn't before. The reality of who she is looms over him like a shadow, and he knows he will never be able to forget this moment. It will follow him long after this flight is over. He glances back at her and sees that she hasn't moved, still standing there quietly waiting. There's no sign of anger, no sign of frustration, nothing that could reveal what she's really thinking. But he can't help but imagine what it must be like for her to face this kind of treatment, to be judged and questioned based on appearances alone. He wonders how many times she's been through this, how many times she's had to deal with people doubting her capabilities or questioning her place in the world. He imagines the countless barriers she must have had to break through, the prejudice she's probably faced just to get to this point, just to own this airline. The supervisor, who had walked away earlier, now returns to the pilot's side, his footsteps quick and deliberate. He doesn't look at the pilot as he approaches, just keeps his eyes focused on the woman standing ahead, her figure commanding and resolute. He can feel the tension in the air as the supervisor comes to a halt beside him. There's a moment of silence between them, as if both are waiting for something, but neither knows what. The supervisor speaks quietly, his voice low, so only the pilot can hear. "You should apologize." The words hang in the air, and the pilot feels another jolt of shame run through him. He knows it's the right thing to do, but it feels impossible. How can he apologize After what he's just done, how can he even begin to make it right when he's so far from where he should have been from the moment he dismissed her at the gate? The supervisor gives him a pointed look, urging him silently to act, but the pilot remains still unsure of how to proceed. He clears his throat and takes a slow step forward, unsure of the words to use. His hands feel clammy as he reaches for his phone to check the time again, as if it might give him some excuse for the awkwardness of the moment. But when he looks back at her, he sees that she's not paying attention to him at all. She's focused ahead, her expression calm as ever. There's a quiet dignity in the way she stands, a subtle power that only someone who understands the weight of the world on their shoulders can carry, and for the first time the pilot feels a deep respect for her. Even though he had been the one to question her, he can't deny the sense of awe that begins to settle in his chest, and it makes him feel even smaller. He finally takes a step forward toward her, hesitating for a fraction of a second before he clears his throat and speaks softly. "I'm sorry for the confusion earlier." The words feel awkward on his tongue, like a foreign language he's not used to speaking. But as he looks at her, he sees the faintest flicker of acknowledgement in her eyes. She doesn't nod, she doesn't speak, but there's something in the way she holds herself that tells him she's heard him, and perhaps that's all that's needed for now. The woman doesn't say anything in response. She simply turns her attention back to the gate and waits for the supervisor to finish processing the rest of the passengers. Her silence is a statement in itself. She doesn't need to say a word to convey her message to him, to let him know that she has already moved past the incident. It no longer matters to her. What matters is what happens next. What matters is that she's in control. And the moment the pilot doubted her, it was clear who was really in charge of this situation. And it wasn't him. The pilot stands there in silence, still processing the apology he just gave, and the look in her eyes that told him more than any words could have said. There's a brief moment of tension in the air as he watches her poised, and still her presence alone feels commanding, like an unspoken force that holds everything together. She doesn't speak, she doesn't gesture, she just waits for the supervisor to finish his work. But to him it feels like everything is moving in slow motion, as if the world around him has shifted, and he's left behind in its wake. The realization of who she is hits him again and again like a drumbeat in his chest. It's not just that she owns the airline, it's that she is someone who knows exactly who she is, someone who has earned every step of the power she holds, and it makes him question everything he thought he knew about the world around him. The people in the waiting area continue to mill about, oblivious to what's unfolding just a few feet away. They don't notice the shift in the atmosphere. The quiet hum of their conversations drowns out the subtle tension between the woman and the pilot. But he can feel it. He can feel how everything has changed in an instant, and the weight of his actions presses down on him as he watches her, the woman who he had so quickly dismissed as unimportant, who he had thought was just another passenger with no special claim to be where she was. He wants to say something else to make it right, but the words don't come. He feels inadequate in this moment, his mind racing for some way to undo the damage done, but he knows there's nothing that can fix it now. As the minutes pass, he watches the supervisor finish scanning through the documents at the desk and looks back at the woman who remains standing like a pillar of calm and control. She has never once wavered. She hasn't raised her voice or demanded special treatment. She hasn't shown any sign of frustration or anger, and it hits him again just how different she is from the passengers. He's used to dealing with the ones who argue and complain, who try to take shortcuts or make excuses. She hasn't done any of that. She hasn't even hinted at being bothered by the situation. In fact, she seems to have known exactly how it would unfold, as if she's seen this all before. And maybe she has, he thinks to himself. Maybe this is just another day in her life where people assume she doesn't belong or she's not worthy of respect. The thought stirs something inside him. It makes him wonder about all the people who have judged her based on her appearance or the color of her skin, how many times she's had to prove herself over and over again in a world that always seems to want to take something from her. Just because of who she is, he realizes how little he knows about her story, how little he's understood about the real struggle behind her calm exterior. She's not just an owner of an airline. She's a woman who's fought for every inch of the success she has, and now here she stands unshaken by his dismissiveness, untouched by the prejudice he had shown her, and in that moment he realizes that his mistake wasn't just a simple misunderstanding, it was a failure to recognize the strength and resilience in front of him. The supervisor finishes his work and hands the woman a boarding pass with a professional nod. She takes it without a word, and the pilot watches as she walks toward the jet bridge. She moves with such grace and confidence that it feels like time slows down just for her, her stride steady and purposeful. She doesn't glance back at him, she doesn't need to, she's already moved past the moment that had made him feel small, she's already claimed her place in the world, and nothing he can do will change that. The pilot stands there watching her disappear into the tunnel, his heart still heavy with the weight of what he's just learned about himself, and about her he feels the sting of his own ignorance, and it lingers long after she's gone. As the plane doors close and the last passengers board the gate area, quiets down, the pilot stands alone, now surrounded by the sound of his own thoughts. He wonders if she'll ever think about this moment again, or if it will fade into the countless others she's had to endure. He hopes she does. He hopes she understands that in that brief exchange, he learned something valuable, something he will never forget, the lesson of humility, the realization that there are things in this world far greater than what meets the eye. And in her silence, and in her composure, she has taught him that sometimes strength is found, not in what is said, but in how one carries themselves through the storm of judgment and doubt. The pilot stands at the gate for a few moments longer, the weight of everything still pressing down on him. He knows he can't stay here forever, but he feels rooted to the spot, unsure of what to do next. His mind keeps replaying the events over and over again. The look in her eyes when he first stopped her, the calm confidence with which she responded, the way she stood there like she knew exactly what was happening all along. He's never experienced anything quite like this before, a moment where he's confronted with his own assumptions and errors so clearly and so swiftly. He's been a pilot for years. He's trained to deal with all kinds of people, all kinds of situations. But this one feels different. This one feels personal. He's never been forced to confront his own biases so directly before, never had a moment where he's had to question himself so completely. He turns away from the gate and begins walking slowly toward the crew room. As he moves through the terminal, he can feel the eyes of other passengers on him. They don't know what just happened. They don't know that just a few moments ago, he made a mistake that shook him to his core. But he feels their gaze all the same. It's almost as if they can sense something has shifted. They can feel the change in the air, even if they don't understand it themselves. He tries to shake off the discomfort, but it lingers with him as he walks through the crowded hallway, the faces of strangers passing by, his eyes focused on the ground. He doesn't want to look at anyone. He doesn't want to make eye contact. He doesn't want to be seen, because deep down he knows he's been exposed in a way he can't escape. As he enters the crew room, he slumps into one of the chairs, his hands running through his hair as he exhales sharply. The room is empty for now, just the hum of air conditioning and the soft sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. But it feels too quiet in here, too still for the thoughts racing through his mind. He stares at the floor, trying to gather his thoughts. But it's hard to concentrate when everything feels so jumbled, when all he can think about is how wrong he was and how he let himself fall into the trap of judgment. He closes his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his breath, but all he sees is her face, the way she stood there unbothered by his actions, as if she had already won without even trying. He wishes he could have seen it earlier, seen the strength she exuded in that moment, but he hadn't, and now he has to live with the fact that he was blind to it. The door to the crew room opens, and one of the other pilots steps in. He doesn't notice the tension in the air as he grabs a coffee mug and heads toward the counter, but the pilot can't ignore it. He can't shake the feeling of discomfort that has settled deep in his chest. It's like there's a weight on him that he can't lift, no matter how hard he tries. He doesn't know how to explain it to the other pilot. How can he explain what just happened without sounding like a fool? How can he put into words the way he's been affected by a woman he had underestimated, a woman he had judged too quickly, a woman who had shown him that strength doesn't always come in the form of loud defiance or public confrontation. Sometimes it comes in the form of quiet dignity, the kind of strength that doesn't need to be proven to anyone because it's already known. He stands up from his chair and walks to the window overlooking the tarmac. The planes are lined up waiting to take off, each one with its own story, its own journey. To begin, he watches as ground crew members move around the planes, preparing them for departure. The scene is calm and orderly, and for a moment he feels some semblance of peace. But it doesn't last long. The reality of what he's learned today sinks in deeper, and he knows that it's something he won't forget, not anytime soon, not ever. In fact, he realizes he can't go back to the way he was before. He can't go back to the man who made assumptions based on appearances or stereotypes. He can't ignore the lesson he's learned, the lesson that tells him to look beyond the surface, to understand the strength in others that might not be immediately visible, to challenge his own beliefs and biases, to grow from this experience and be better than he was before. He takes a deep breath and looks out at the planes one more time before walking out of the room. His steps feel heavier now, but also with a sense of purpose. He knows he has work to do, but more than that, he knows he has to be a better person and a better pilot, someone who sees the value in everyone, no matter their background or appearance, someone who will never make the same mistake again. The pilot steps out of the crew room into the bustling terminal. The noise of travelers and the overhead announcements fill the space, but all of it feels distant to him, like he's in a world of his own. His mind is still swirling with everything that happened earlier, the confrontation at the gate, the way he had judged her so harshly without knowing a thing about her. His footsteps feel heavy as he walks through the terminal. The pilot sits in his seat on the plane, feeling the familiar hum of the engine starting up, but this time the sound is different. It's quieter, almost like a distant background to the thoughts racing through his mind. He buckles his seatbelt and looks out of the window at the sprawling landscape below, the clouds moving slowly across the sky, like the world itself is drifting by, unaware of the inner change he's experiencing. He takes a deep breath and closes his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his thoughts. But the image of her, the woman who had stood before him so poised and calm, is still fresh in his mind. He can't shake it, no matter how hard he tries. It's as if her presence has etched itself into his memory forever, and he wonders if she even knows how much of an impact she's had on him, how much she's made him rethink the way he views the world. As the plane begins to taxi down the runway, he feels the familiar pull of acceleration, but his mind remains distant. He's thinking about how easy it is to fall into patterns of judgment based on assumptions that we carry with us without ever questioning them. How often do people walk through life without considering the full depth of those around them? How often do they judge someone based on a single glance or a fleeting interaction? He realizes now how often he's done that, how many times he's dismissed someone based on their appearance or background without even considering their story or their struggles, and it makes him uncomfortable to think about the missed opportunities for connection, the times he's allowed his own biases to cloud his understanding of others. The plane ascends into the air, and he watches as the city below becomes smaller and smaller, the buildings and streets fading into the distance. He feels the weight of his thoughts growing heavier with each passing moment, and he wonders if he's capable of truly changing, or if this realization is just another fleeting thought that will fade over time. He doesn't want it to fade. He doesn't want to go back to being the man who made assumptions based on surface-level observations. He knows he can't undo the past, but he also knows he has the power to shape the future, and in that moment he makes a silent promise to himself that he will never again judge someone based on the color of their skin or the way they carry themselves, that he will take the time to see people for who they truly are, not just the version of them that fits neatly into his narrow understanding of the world. He thinks about the woman again and wonders what her life has been like, what challenges she's faced to get to where she is today. He knows there's so much more to her than what he saw at that gate. He knows that her journey is far from simple or easy, and yet she handled the situation with such grace, with such dignity, that it almost felt like a lesson she was teaching without even trying. He feels a deep sense of admiration for her that goes beyond the fact that she owns the airline. It's the way she carries herself. It's the quiet strength that radiates from her that has left an indelible mark on him. It's made him question everything he thought he knew about power and influence, about how success is achieved in this world. As the plane reaches cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign turns off, he leans back in his seat and lets out a quiet sigh. He knows there's still work to be done. He knows that changing his mindset won't happen overnight, But this is a start. This is the beginning of something new, something that has the potential to shape the way he interacts with the world from now on. He realizes that it's not enough to simply go through the motions of life to exist. Without truly understanding those around him, he has to be more intentional, he has to be more aware of the people he encounters and the impact they have on him, and the impact he has on them. He can't afford to make the same mistakes again. As he looks out the window once more, he feels a sense of calm settle over him, not because everything is perfect or resolved, but because he knows that he is on the right path, the path of growth, the path of understanding. He knows that there will be moments where he falters, where he makes mistakes, but he also knows that each mistake is an opportunity to learn, to do better, to be better, and he's determined not to waste any of those opportunities. He thinks about the woman one last time, and he silently thanks her for teaching him something that no one else ever has, for showing him that sometimes the greatest strength comes in the form of silence, in the form of quiet resilience that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone but simply exists. And he hopes that one day he will be able to carry that same kind of strength with him wherever he goes as he continues his journey through life, knowing that with each step forward he's becoming the person he's meant to be.